So, I mean, this is a hypothetical question, but from what you may know, if Bonham hadn't died, do you know if Zeppelin would have continued on for much longer, or would they have come to an end inevitably anyways at some point in the near future?
Well, that's a good question. I would say yes. Personally, I would say they'd have just gone on because had Bonham not died, there would have been another album, and then they would have wanted to tour that, I'm sure. I mean, as it turns out, he did die, so it's hypothetical. And the fact is that they then had to find their own way in the music business. Not that they had to. I mean, they're all billionaires, but obviously they would want to. And so Robert found his own, had to find a different career away from Zeppelin. And I'm sure he's very happy that that's what happened, because I think he was getting fed up with screaming his socks off. I'll say that in case there's any children listening. So, I think he was getting a bit fed up with that anyway. And because, it was a heavy rock band, it was blasting and it was good when they were youngsters, but it might be something that you grow out of. Of course, they could have changed, I suppose, they could have changed the format a little bit. But, well, your question really was, would they have continued? And I think they would have continued. They would definitely have done another album, and maybe they'd have done another two albums, because they love to do that. They love to get together and they like to play together. And then, that's also why they would have probably carried on doing gigs. And also there's phenomenal money involved, hundreds of millions, let's face it. That's why the Stones do it, no matter how rich they are. And also they have fun and they enjoy it, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So, I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier that if Zeppelin hadn't, I mean, obviously if Bonham hadn't passed, that there would likely have been another record and you would have been involved with that to some degree or another. Do you know if there were any demos that the band had prepared, if there was any like unreleased material the band was writing with, or was there nothing ready for a new album yet from what you may know?
There's no more unreleased material to be heard. He would have found it because Jimmy doesn't mess around. He's very much still dedicated to the history of Zeppelin. And if there was something else around, he would have put it out.
Do you know if there were any like the wheels were turning on starting to write new material for another record post?
No, I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. See, the thing is that I've only met Jimmy a couple of times when Bonham died. So, of course, I met him. We worked together for 5 years after that. If there was any more material or if they were working together. I don't really think so, because I think that if there would have been, if they'd have rehearsed something or anything, then it would have come out by now. They're probably see, the thing is they were about to go on tour anyway. So, and I don't think they'd been on tour for a long time, this European tour. So probably that would have been them getting together to maybe do all sorts of things. And they were rehearsing only up the road in Bray, near where I am. So I kept going there in hopes to meet Jimmy, but every time I arrived, then either just left or they hadn't arrived yet. And but anyway, not too long after this, before the tour, Bonham was found dead in Jimmy's house in Windsor, and so that was a big blow, really, because I was, it was a big blow. I mean, whether I was getting ready to do the next Zeppelin album, kind of neither here nor there, because this was a terrible thing to happen to them. So it was a bit shocking. Basically, what took place then was us starting to work on this tribute album, which was really a tribute to Bonham, starting off with this drum track, Bonzo's Montreux, crazy 24-track tape of Bonzo's Montreux, which was basically all drums. And I always say it was like being thrown in the deep end, really, because it could have just been a rock track, but it was quite peculiar being all drums. I mean, it was magnificent, really. But I think it was quite long. Then we had to edit it, and editing it wasn't easy. But it was, that was the first track we worked on. And then the other tracks that were from that Zeppelin album were from that made up the Zeppelin album, Coda, where there was a couple from that were left over from In Through the Outdoor. I mean, I haven't got that album in front of me, but I think Wearing and Tearing, there was another one. Then there was a track called I Can't Quit You, which actually was, Jimmy didn't want it to be known. It's going to be known now, isn't it? But Jimmy didn't want it to be known that it was a live track. He wanted it to be known that it was some sort of recording. So I had to take all the audience off. But basically, it was Led Zeppelin, I think, at the Albert Hall. But it was a great track. I Can't Quit You is a really good track. And what else we did? There was Poor Tom. And for that one, I remember Robert Plant coming in. That was the first time I met Robert. And that was nice, because, I mean, to be honest, I wasn't a huge Zeppelin fan. The most I'd got into Zeppelin was actually when Elton John bought his first giant stereo system for his mansion. He had these massive 4 speakers in a lounge, a huge lounge, and we had Zeppelin 2, which we used to whack up to test out his stereo. And actually, my favorite album was In Through the Outdoor, without a doubt.
Oh, cool.
I thought that was a great album. But so also I think at that time, pretty sure John Paul Jones popped in, because I seem to remember playing something and he said, "Can you turn that down? And what do you think I am?" And I thought, well, I thought you were the bass player in one of the biggest rock bands in the world. So I thought, chances are you like loud music. He would go, turn it down.
So, I mean, prior to John Bonham's passing, were you thinking about how you'd approach working on the next Zeppelin record?
Oh, yeah, I was. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about how I would do it. I mean, it's awful to talk about it now because, I mean, I would have loved it. It would have been absolutely brilliant to have done that. But I suppose the Booby Prize, which wasn't a bad one, though, was when I got to work with Jimmy and Paul Rodgers with The Firm. Yeah. Because that was, in some ways you could say it was maybe even better than maybe what the Zeppelin would have been, because you've definitely got one of the best singers on the planet with Paul Rodgers. We had Chris Slade on drums, who's totally amazing, and Tony can't remember his surname, on bass. Simon Kirk, who was the drummer with Bad Company. Yeah, he was a great drummer. Well, and Free, wasn't he? He was a drummer in Free as well. So I think he thought, because they were signed to Swan Song, which is Zeppelin's record company. I think maybe Simon thought he must be in for that job, to take over, and he would have been amazing, totally brilliant, without a doubt. But I think, the mark of Jimmy, if you like, and Robert and John Paul Jones is that they felt that Zeppelin was 4 people. Sorry,
That's
and
okay.
And without Bonham, it wasn't there. They didn't want to carry on that band. That's the thing, which I think is that's pretty good of them, really. Not like this. Well, I mean, I shouldn't sort of badmouth, but I mean, the Stones. Charlie Watts died. Right, getting another drummer, off we go. But I think Zeppelin were more like Bonham's. I don't say that Charlie Watts's contribution was any less than Bonham's, but I don't know. I think they were a closer unit, like definitely Bonham and Jimmy and Bonham and Robert. They were just so tight and close that they couldn't imagine going out without him. The thing with Bonham was his feel, his that's what made them so heavy, really, because they did everything. It was fairly slow, and slow tempos. But what makes it heavy is their timing and the sound, and giving it plenty of space. That's when we were talking about sound, and I was, thinking about the mill for John Bonham's drum sound. It's possible to do that, but you need the space. I don't mean physical space. I mean, you need the space in the sound. So if the drummer's playing at 100 million miles an hour and he's hitting the cymbals all over the place and the hi-hats all over the place, there's nowhere for that sound to go, whereas it's dumps, bah, boom, dum, bah. You can have a nice big rock sound, which is what they used to get. And the thing is, that's what I was going to say, is that Zeppelin didn't always work in giant rooms, like Abbey Road or something. That was the other great thing about Jimmy as a producer, is that no matter what studio they went to, he'd make sure he got a Zeppelin drum sound or a Zeppelin sound, which was generally a big roomy sound. And I know they worked at the ABBA studios. And yeah, Jimmy used to say I don't know, they'd put a microphone in a cupboard or down a hall or something like that, inventing ways of getting that sound, which wouldn't just be using a big room. And anyway, I recorded, I mixed John Bonham's drums, so I know what the drum sound is like. And the bass drum was enormous sounding. It sounded like one of those you get in a fair, with the beaters. Whereas, the rock drummer normally takes the front skin off and puts a load of cushions inside. This sounded like it definitely had the front skin on. And it's just enormous. But, and then the snare sound as well, he's not bashing it away. He's probably got quite a light touch in a way. And anyway, he was a remarkable drummer. Like Charlie Watts in a way, he was sort of more like a jazz drummer, or Ringo Starr. Jazz would have been part of his upbringing, not just straight ahead rock. So he was very bloody good, basically.
So, I mean, what did you think? I mean, I know you didn't get to work physically with him, but having been like intimately involved in mixing his tracks on Coda, what did you think of him as a drummer in particular? Like, what was it about John Bonham that people say he's the greatest of all time?
First of all, his sound, like I say, it was enormous. And listening to the individual multi-tracks, when I lifted up the bass drum, I thought, blimey, it does say bass drum on it, but that's not a bass drum that I've normally heard. It was like one of them fairground things, boom, 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 it was enormous. And what you had to do with that sound, you had to compress it quite a lot so that you still got the attack, but you had to work on it because it had so many frequencies anyway. It was obviously a very deep and sounds like a very large bass drum, that's for sure. It wasn't a tiny little bass drum. I didn't ask Jimmy. I didn't say, so how big was this bass? I just got on with it. And also you could hear that there were microphones above, like above the, picking up the snare, picking up the tom-toms. The main word is feel, F-E-E-L. That's the main word that you would use to describe what separates John Bonham from a lot of other drummers is his feel. And I think that, even hearing him playing on his own, he's got a great feel. And I still love listening to Bonzo's Montreux and talking about it, whereas it's just drums. So that's just him. And he's not playing to a click. Yeah, that's what separates him out from other drummers. There was something else I was going to say. I was going to say that also within Zeppelin, and also because they're not playing to a metronomic click, they're making their own feel. And when you get a great rhythm guitarist like Jimmy playing with a great drummer like Bonham, they're setting up a unique feel that can't be replicated by machines or anything like that, really. It's very individualistic and separated Zeppelin out from other bands. Yeah, I mean, there's some great other drummers. Phil Collins is a great drummer. Charlie Watts is, a great drummer. Zach Starkey, absolutely brilliant drummer. But I mean, I suppose, when someone dies, however terrible it is, they get frozen in time, don't they?
Yep.
And the thing is that when we did the Coda album, I mean, this was a tribute to John, wasn't it? So we were living John Bonham, every day when putting his drums together. And I was very aware that, of course, the poor guy died, but this is great. What we're doing is this tribute. And in fact, there's a little while ago that an absolutely brilliant drummer who comes close to John Bonham, who's Zach Starkey. I don't know if you know
of course.
who he is, but anyway, he's a brilliant guy, brilliant drummer. And he rang me up, or he got in touch with me, and that was mainly because he was a total Bonham fanatic. And when he heard that I did the Bonzo's Montreux, he had to meet me, he wanted to work with me and all this thing, because it was great to be doing that. And so we were living Bonham every day, really.
One thing I wanted to ask you is, obviously Jimmy Page is known as being one of the greatest guitarists ever, rightfully so. He's also one of the greatest producers, but people often kind of overlook that to a certain extent. How would you compare, from your experience with Jimmy, I know you've worked with him as a guitarist, have you also worked with him producing wise, like together?
Of course.
Yeah. How
Well,
would
of
you
course I have. Yeah,
how would you
of
compare
course,
his
because
approach producing
yeah,
and recording guitars?
yeah, good question. So, and I do talk about that because, yeah, Jimmy, very eccentric guy, not always easy to understand when I was working with him for one reason or another. But when we were doing the very first project that we did, as I say, was the putting together the Coda album. And all right, so there wasn't one interesting thing was that you knew that I knew that Jimmy Page was the producer of all these Zeppelin albums. So I suppose I was waiting to be told what to do, or I do this, now we do this, then we do that, now you do this. He didn't do that. But even when we were doing the Bonzo's ridiculous drum thing, he didn't tell me what drum sound he wanted or what reverbs to use. I mean, the thing is that when Jimmy came to the mill, he brought a load of his equipment with him because Jimmy, which also people don't know, is he's an incredibly, he's really into equipment. He's really into technology, the whole sound technology. He had a desk at his previous house, which was one of the first fully automated desks. He had all these incredible sort of computer ideas and machines that would be running delays. He had tons of rack equipment to do with reverbs and not reverbs, but delays that he used to use on Robert Plant's voice. So he was very, very much into technology. So I sort of assumed he was going to tell me what to do here, but he didn't. He just sat back and kind of, I got the feeling that if I was doing something wrong, he'd have said, "Oh no, do this." And but he very much let me get on with it. When it came to more of his ideas as a producer, I would say that was when we were doing the Death Wish 2 soundtrack, because he had some great ideas, backwards pianos, and he was much more. It was the producer side of him that came out much more during that project. He was really putting together singers. He had plenty of ideas, that's for sure. I think he's absolutely great producer. Very, very good to work with in the studio. Good atmosphere. Not telling people what to do. Hopefully, just putting together the right bunch of people, like he did with Zeppelin. Really, and that's a good way of doing it. I mean, put the right bunch of people together, and then you don't have to tell them to do anything, do you? Because you know that they're going to do the job the way you want it. So I think that's how Jimmy goes about stuff, really, because let's face it, he was in the music business and working in studios from such a young age. And not everyone knows that either. So as a top session guy, going around the studios, doing all the middle of the road stuff, God knows some of the things he might have done. He probably did adverts and all sorts of stuff. Apart from, as we know, playing with the Kinks and playing on some big pop records. So he was very, very knowledgeable about the studio. There wasn't much he didn't know about it. He might know what he wanted to play, and that wasn't always easy, but he definitely didn't have a problem with, I want to do this idea, so we're doing that, and actually those things are easier to sort of have happen, but so definitely switched on producer, no doubt about it. Yeah.
So when you're recording him now you're in producer engineer mode, you're recording him. Are there any particular mics he prefers having his guitars recorded with? Like, what is his approach technically in the studio?
Yes. Very good question. Very good question. I'd forgotten that. So I've got a very good answer for that, because people will want to know this, because this is different. So what he would do is he'd if we were doing a solo, say, he'd do a few solos like most people would. Like, he'd do one solo, do it again. Then what he'd do is he'd tell me to put all 3 solos up, or all 4 solos up. And I think, blimey, that's different. So he'd play them all. And then what he would do is he'd design a solo. He'd design a solo made up of the 3 or 4 or 5 solos. And sometimes that was hard to follow. And sometimes I'd think to ask him a lot of questions, but then I found it was better not to ask questions, just to try and do what he's saying, and it'll all turn out hopefully all right in the end. So it might, because I've done that. I've done many many guitarists where you choose bits of their solos. But it was sometimes when someone else is trying to tell you what to do, it's not quite so easy. But basically, he designed the solo in that way. So there'd be two notes from that one note from that one. There might even be a part where there were two solos playing at the same time. That's what I mean. It was quite complicated and hard to follow. And there'd probably be times when I was thinking, this is going to be awful. This isn't going to work. But then we finish it, we play it back, and I think, bloody hell, that's bloody good. That's a bloody good solo. And actually, when I listen now to Zeppelin tracks, and I hear a solo, I can hear sort of how it's been made up. That it wasn't always a live solo. That's a producer. That's a producer guitarist producing his own guitar solos. Also, he used to use, I don't know about mics, that was pretty much left to me, but that's also another good question because I'm remembering back now. And the whole time I worked with Jimmy, we used an AC30 dialed up to number 12, I would say. It was definitely more than 10. And it was an AC30, and it was a particularly great one, and it would be definitely almost flat out. And then he very rarely used the Les Paul in the studio, if ever. It would be the Fender Telecaster. And that combination was a massive sound. He'd also use his string bender, Fender string bender a lot, which that might have been a Telecaster, I'm not quite sure. Do you know the string bender guitar? Yeah. So actually when, and if you don't know about that guitar, that's actually a bit of a, it gives his solos a lot of personality because you hear all this bendy stuff, which you imagine he might have done with his finger, but he does it with the, it's kind of like a country. Normally it would be for country sounds, I guess, but with it wound up to 10, it worked for rock, absolutely. But so sound-wise, I don't know what mic, I probably was sticking 87, I'm sure, on his AC30. And it was a blasting sound. Yeah, it's a great sound. And actually, I'm going to say it as well because I often say this, but I haven't said it for a long time. Is that my favorite thing that Jimmy would do is his rhythm playing. He got this phenomenal way of like hitting the chord right at the last millisecond, on the downbeat, so that it's going, and it just gives it more power that way. It's not like in front of the beat or way behind it. It's just as it's coming up. And when he was playing because I never got to work with him with John Bonham, but when I put Dave Mattox, I don't know if you know the drummer Dave Mattox, but brilliant drummer, and him and Jimmy, because Jimmy seems to work off of the drums, not the bass or not. There's not many other people in Led Zeppelin, was there? But or the vocal, it was definitely him and Bonham, So they set up this great rhythm and drums, and I watched Jimmy doing that with Dave Mattox, and it was great because he is a great rhythm player. I that's one of the things that maybe even people don't realize, But for me in the studio, his rhythm playing was very, very good.
When you were working with Jimmy Page, is there anything that he ever did in the studio that really surprised you? Like, wow, that's an interesting way of approaching this, or I never thought a guitarist would do that. Like, was there any one thing that stuck out to you?
Everything surprised me because I'd never worked with anyone like that. I've got a very good answer for that.
Okay.
Perfect answer. Right. So we're sitting there, we're doing Death Wish 2, and we're using this guitar synth. I mean, that was surprising. And then, of course, one guitar synth wasn't enough. So he had, like, the guy at Roland bring down two of these pedal boards. And basically the guitar synth, you could make it do all sorts of weird stuff, like going up and down, like swooping up the note and swooping down. And Jimmy would be tapping away on all these things, And then he had another one brought in, so it was surprising he did stand up through all that and not fall over. But then we were in there one day, and someone said, his guitar tech suddenly said, "What about the theremin on this?" And I'd never heard of a theremin. And I'm thinking, what the hell is a theremin? So then suddenly someone comes in with this big cardboard box with aerials sticking out of it. And I'm sure there was like straw coming out of it as well. And I just thought, I thought they were having a joke on me. I thought this was for my benefit. And they start setting this thing up, and I'm just thinking, I think I've seen everything now. This is, what the hell is this? Anyway, so they set up this, people who know the theremin, they set up this aerial, and then it's connected to an Echoplex tape, and then he's doing all that business with the all that business. And I'd never heard of a theremin. I mean, I've checked it out. I checked it out after that and found out it's a 19th century instrument, and one of the earliest electronic instruments. Talk about surprising. Yeah, that was. But you see, that's the thing. I mean, Jimmy was full of surprises. He's that sort of a guy, and that's the way he sort of conducted himself. I mean, the whole fact he put Zeppelin was a surprise, wasn't it? If you were around, you're too young. but when Zeppelin arrived, it was like, what is that? It was like, I mean, all right, there were a lot of bands around at the time that were sort of similar, but they were a phenomenon without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were like brilliant musicians, not many of them. I mean, talking about a three-piece, really. You're talking about bass, drums, and guitar, one bass, and drums, making this amazing sound, great musicians. And, they also followed their own, way, didn't they? Didn't put out singles, they wouldn't do this, we don't do that, we don't do this. They're very much like they designed themselves, So, and that's the background that Jimmy came from. And like you say, he's considered one of the greatest guitarists of all time, and that's not bad. Yeah. And actually, what I always say now, I often say, and I think very lucky that this happened this way, because I work with Led Zeppelin, and I'm very proud of that, is because a lot of young bands, you say to them, and they could be 15 or 16 or 18, and you say, who's your favorite band? They say Led Zeppelin. I said, but Led Zeppelin disbanded 40 years ago, isn't there anything a little bit later on, and they go, no, Led Zeppelin, that was it, and that's Led Zeppelin. Unfortunately, then you listen to their music and it's nothing like Led Zeppelin, because I'm always looking out for another Led Zeppelin.
When you're working with Jimmy in studio on tape, how many takes do you guys do typically? And do you often double the takes afterwards? What was that aspect of it like?
It's two different things, really. So first of all, you said, how many takes would you do?
Yeah.
Well, if I was working with Gus, it could be hundreds. Gus being Elton John's producer, used to do many, many takes with the rhythm section in the studio. We might do 20 different takes of the same song. And then what he would do is cut between them, cut all the best takes together, even only to make up a 4-minute track song. So, but when you're talking about, that's the difference between some pop productions and a rock band, because a rock band would tend to not want to do that. A rock band like Jimmy, like with Zeppelin, I'm sure, or with the Firm, is that you go out there and you do a great take and you go, that's the one. Basically, they'd go out there and they'd get a good groove, and then they go, how was that? And I go, bloody brilliant, come in and hear it. And they go, you're right, and that's it. And as I say, even to the extent when you're talking about double track vocals, Paul Rodgers didn't even want to do the song again. He didn't want to sing the song again, let alone double track it. That's it. It's finished. So basically what you're talking about there is a band trying to reproduce what they might do live on stage in the studio. And that's quite a different thing to the way pop records are made now, or even rock records are made now, where you're layering and layering and layering, and you're using Pro Tools and you're copying and pasting and all this sort of stuff. It's very, very different. And basically, you can end up with amazing results, absolutely. And some might say you end up with better results. But then if you go back to some of the 70s music and 80s music, which wasn't done that way, and you go, wow, that's better, And then if you describe how it was recorded, which was just 4 or 5 people playing live in the studio and an engineer recording it, you go, wow, they're geniuses, compared to today. unfortunately, without getting too depressed about it, um, musicians today, I mean, very difficult. It's not often you come across amazing drummers like John Bonham, incredible singers like Paul Rodgers, and amazing producer, guitarist like Jimmy Page. You talk about Jimmy Page, who was playing guitar when he was about 8, and only wanted to be a great guitarist, not being the biggest band in the world. He probably had no idea about that. He just wanted to be a great guitarist and be playing live, And so he made it his thing to be that person. And the same with Paul Rodgers as far as singing was concerned. Not to be the greatest songwriter in the world, not to be in the biggest band. He just wanted to be able to sing the best. And that's what I say to a lot of youngsters, and hopefully some that are watching, is that, try not to be everything. And it's not actually very possible to be everything in music, but try and be the best at even just one thing is sometimes definitely good enough. That's unfortunately what a lot of youngsters, they want to be the singer, the guitarist, the bass player, the producer, the engineer, the writer, the this, that, and the other, Unfortunately, not so many records are done these days in teams of people, and the best teams of people being bands. That's where the best music was made, within, with a lot of heartache a lot of the time, a lot of screaming and shouting and pulling and pushing and this, that, and the other, but out of it came some great music.
I wanted to ask you about the firm. So how did that all come together with Jimmy? Like, were you involved with that from the beginning? I know they had 2 records. You worked on the first one. What was it like working on
definitely.
that record?
Brilliant, totally brilliant. I think there's stories that that Jimmy was very depressed, maybe because of Zeppelin splitting up and not splitting up. I mean, couldn't carry on. So. I don't know, I read a few stories about that, but one way or another, Paul Rodgers, I'd been working with Paul on his solo stuff, on his solo album, so I sort of knew him. And anyway, Bad Company was signed to Swan Song, so they were part of that group. And Jim, I knew Paul admired Jimmy so much, and I'm sure that was the same because Paul Rodgers is an amazing singer. So one way or another, I can't remember any more discussions. It was just we started work on that album, and it was Paul Rodgers, Jimmy Page, like I said, and this crazy drummer guy, Chris Slade, and Tony, who was pretty amazing bass player. And I set them up in the studio, and I set up a guide, what I thought was going to be a guide vocal. I put screens up and all that business. And because actually, prior to that, Jimmy did make a start on a different band, and that was with Chris Squires and Alan White. And that was a good project. There wasn't really a singer. That was the only thing. And I kept putting forward ideas for singers, but I don't think Jimmy could find a singer that matched it. But it was good music. But anyway, there was nothing peculiar about the firm, I would say. It was great material, amazing singer. In fact, Paul, one of the problems was that when they'd be out there doing one of the tracks, whatever it was, and then they come in and go, yeah, that's the one. And then I'd assume that we would then do the vocal again, and he'd go, no, that's nothing wrong with that. And I go, well, you can't keep that. It's got guitars on it. You can hear the drums in the background. No, we're not doing that again. So that was a bit weird. But they were brilliant vocals, and I always thought that "You've Lost That Loving Feeling" should have been a single. I love that. That should definitely have been a single. That was such a great version of that. And the thing that I regret on the album when I listen to it is the bloody reverbs I use. That's the thing, because at the time, digital reverb was all the rage. So I stuck a lot of reverbs on it, and that kind of dates it a bit. And when I listen to it, it seems to work on Radioactive, which was a mad track anyway. But I think on some of the others, I'm wishing I could turn the reverb down a bit. I know what I'd like to do, Jimmy, if you're listening, is remix it. Yeah, that would be bloody good. Let's remix it. Let's remix the Firm album. We love that album. There's a lot of Zeppelin fans that love the Firm. It would be good to remix it, that's for sure, yeah.
You were saying that you felt that Jimmy Page might have had like a little bit of a post Led Zeppelin depression thing, and that's kind of why maybe he did the Firm to kind of get out of that funk. When you were
Yeah.
working on the Firm, or when you were working on Coda, was the death of John Bonham, was that kind of looming over any of it, or was that not really there?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't remember that. I mean, he's quite a private guy, really, Jimmy. See, the thing is that for people that have been doing this a long time, even then, when you get in the studio, you're there to do what you're there to do, and it's difficult enough doing that without getting into other areas that could spoil the session or for anything like that. So
Mm-hmm.
you're looking to have a good time, to have a good atmosphere. That's what I remember about the Firm, actually, that everyone was kind of having a good time. And also definitely when we did the Death Wish 2 soundtrack, which actually I reckon that was the best one. Probably the Firm was the best music, but from a technical point of view, Death Wish 2 was probably the best thing I did with Jimmy, because doing music for film isn't easy. It's very technical. The director's already told you where he wants the music, and also we were using like technical gizmos or whatever it was, but actually they were quite early ones to achieve what had to be done, and then there was orchestrations to do. So from a technical point of view, that was probably Death Wish 2 was the one. Jimmy, as crazy guy as he kind of is, he's so methodical. He's so methodical in everything he seems to do. I mean, they just brought out a photographic book. He just brought out a photographic book. He's got, and he had all this stuff. And if he didn't have it, he hires researchers to go looking for, because one of the researchers rang me up to say, have you got any pictures of the mill and all this sort of stuff? He's very, very switched on, methodical, and eccentric, I would say. He likes to get everything right and present it correctly and the whole bit, which is funny in a way when you then think about the music, the best music that he's known for, which actually is quite messy, if you like, and rocky and, extravagantly all over the place, but somehow comes together, in the tightness and the feel. But it's not, it's not classical music, is it? It's not like, everyone reading notes, which you'd have thought that would have been something someone who's that careful about everything might be more into, But I mean, it's very Larry what he does. He's a Larry guitarist.
Yeah.
He's all over the shop with it, not like Clapton, if you like, who's more precise, I mean, let's face it, look, it's a bit like when people start comparing racing drivers, who's the greatest racing driver on earth? Who's the greatest racing driver that's ever been? Who's the greatest this or that and the other? And when you talk about guitarists, they're all different. They just had different styles, and that's what makes it so great, that it's still a bloody bit of wood with 6 strings on it. But between them, they managed to make it sound completely different, Jimi Hendrix died at, 27?
Yep.
And let's face it, well, in my opinion, he was definitely the greatest guitarist of all time. I got to meet him, actually. I only got to meet him.
Really?
Yeah, I got to meet him when he was playing on Steve Stills' first album, because my mate Clive was engineering it at Island Studio, Basing Street, and Jimmy, and he was like really quiet, really shy. And listen, when he came along, we used to have rows about who was the best guitarist, and it wasn't Jimmy Page, it was Eric Clapton or Jimi Hendrix. And as far as I was concerned, it was definitely Jimi Hendrix. But you'd have terrible rows with people, I can't be friends with you then. What, you don't like what you're saying? Eric Clapton's a better guitarist than Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix? Well, you can puck off then, because you're mad.
So going back to Coda for a moment, is there anything else about the making of that record that stuck out to you?
That's when I met Robert. I think he might have done some vocals. I think he came in to do the vocals. Jimmy brought in some great mics. He had one of these old 47s that the Beatles used. And I think I was very pleased if Robert Plant's coming in, I'm definitely going to set up that microphone, because it'll just look great, apart from it'll obviously sound great, because he's got a great voice. But so we definitely did that.
Walter's Walk?
Yeah, that was definitely. I think that was the one that Robert did some vocals on. Walter's Walk. That was a funny track. Yeah,
Okay, interesting.
weird track. Yeah,
Why is that funny to you? Like, what stuck out about that track to you?
I'll tell you what it is because Led Zeppelin are a good example of bands in the 70s and 80s that didn't have a genre. You know, it wasn't like, oh, they're a heavy metal band or they're a pop band, they're a rock band. They do all sorts of stuff. And Walter's Walk is like a country and western, I think. And Poor Tom is definitely, it's like country and western, you know. It's because they all like various different types of music. And on the one album, you'd get all sorts of different, and Elton used to do the same thing. You know, it'd be country comforts, like a country and western song, you know, and that was what was great also about those bands. They got such a wide spectrum of music on each record. Definitely, we worked on Poor Tom. We did all sorts of, because everything I did with Jimmy was usually complicated, to be honest, apart from maybe The Firm, which was fairly straightforward, although there were probably complicated stuff in it. But I know we did something weird with Poor Tom. I don't know what it was, because I think maybe Jimmy didn't have the multi-track, or I don't know. We had to do something. I Can't Quit You, I was saying he didn't want it to be known it was it was live, so I couldn't use the ambient mics. I couldn't use the audience mics. So I brought in this incredible early EMT digital reverb to recreate that. So I did that. The ones that came from In Through the Outdoor, there was nothing to do. They were just mixed.
Mm-hmm. How did your relationship with Zeppelin begin? Did you work with them prior to Coda? Like, how did that all come together?
Yeah, well, it's not really it's not so much direct relation with Zeppelin. It was more with Jimmy Page. And that came about because in about 1980, I guess, Gus Dudgeon, who owned the Mill Studios in Cookham, had to sell it. And one of the people that came to view it, interested to buy it, was Jimmy Page. And I was there. We were working with an American band, actually, Shooting Star. And there'd been a lot of sort of, we weren't allowed to know who was coming. He was coming in a helicopter. He's flying in. And there's all this mystery about it, which later I found out is pretty much par for the course with Jimmy and Led Zeppelin, always surrounded in a bit of mystery somehow. And anyway, in walks this guy, obviously recognized him straight away as Jimmy Page, and he was very quiet, very shy, had a look round, took note what was going on, and next thing we hear, he's buying the studio. So, and also I heard that he wanted to keep me on as engineer and I guess studio manager, so that was very nice. And so I was now really looking forward to working with Jimmy.
That's awesome. So another huge artist you worked with is Elton John. Do you remember what it was like working with him for the first time?
In the first Elton John album, I booked the studio, I booked the musicians, I booked the piano, I booked the organ. I was really coordinating. Coordinating is what we were doing for those albums, and that would have been Honky Chateau and Tumbleweed. Doing the sleeves, I was instrumental in putting the sleeves together, photo sessions. I was organizing press receptions, gigs for Elton, equipment for Elton.
You were 18 years old when you started working with them on that American tour. For you personally, what was that like? I mean, you're 18, you're working with Elton John. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was totally brilliant. But the funny thing is that because it was just, I haven't got anything to compare it with, it was just like almost like normal. And what was exciting about it, what was apart from never been to America and now we're on tour, which I've never done in my life, was also because I've been such a fan and we were promoting Elton in the UK and getting nowhere. So now we'd be playing Carnegie Hall and all these kids are jumping up and down and screaming and going berserk, and including Canada, where we started playing as well. So it was so great to see my mate, Elton, going down a storm with the audiences and finally being appreciated, So there was so much excitement there. I mean, we were all sort of wide-eyed because no one had really, Elton had been to America a couple of times before, but this was all new to all of us. And we were all sort of like a bit like a circus in a way, a traveling circus. But because we were all experiencing it the same, it was just great fun. It was absolutely great fun. I'm not crazy about flying. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I hate flying. So, I didn't like that aspect. I seem to have found out I had a bit of a phobia for large and closed spaces. They always make me dizzy or something. So there was a lot of those when you're touring. So it was actually only the physical aspects that were, you had to sort of cope with all this traveling and sitting around and waiting and all that stuff. But the gigs always made it worthwhile because they were so exciting. It was great fun, and they're all my mates, Nigel and Dee. The first band was just a 3-piece, piano, bass, and drums. Extremely exciting, great days, and definitely more exciting looking back 50 years ago, than it probably was at the time. I'm sure it wasn't quite as because touring, actually, everyone thinks it is so exciting, but actually it's a lot of the time it's very boring sitting around waiting and all that. There's a lot of waiting for planes, waiting for this, waiting for that. But it was, seeing Elton go from obscurity to people actually almost ignoring him on purpose by talking in gigs and saying, "Shut up, he's trying to play a song here," to actually going berserk when he walks out on stage, and loving it was just so thrilling because he's a mate. This isn't like someone you don't know. This is your buddy, and I was kind of looking after him, although most of the time he was looking after me, really. We were just traveling, I mean, they were great tours, absolutely. I mean, I did two tours as his personal assistant, and then the last tour I did was actually I was looking after Kiki D, and that was in 1974. But by 74, he was just huge. We had our own plane. In fact, we had the same plane that Zeppelin
really
used to use. Yeah, the Starship. The Rolling Stones used it. Zeppelin used it. And then Elton had it for the 1974. He had it for a couple of tours, I think. So,
like literally the exact same plane or the same model?
Yeah, exactly the same plane, I think.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah. So, and we used to have a sea of limousines. The 74 tour. I mean, now he has his own plane. The band have their own plane. I mean, obviously it's even moved on from then. But the last tour I did, which was, as I say, way back in 74, when we did Madison Square Gardens, when John Lennon came on stage, it was, it was pretty amazing, really. So I do miss touring. I miss that. And we traveled to some great places. We went to some great places where you are in Canada, really loved the Canadian audiences, and being in Canada anyway, generally was very nice. So yeah, I miss that. I'll have to do that again at some point.
So how did your friendship with Elton John begin, and how did you end up working with him?
I met him at 15. He's 74, so he was about 20, 21. And, basically I went from school, this is very interesting the way this interview has gone, because normally we start with that. But now this is at the end. I like that.
Yeah.
So we've come forward. So anyway, I went from school working for a guy called Dick James, who was the Beatles music publisher, and he was also Elton John's publisher, or Reg Dwight, as he was known then. And I pretty quickly got to meet Reg, and he was a great guy, outrageous, very, very eccentric even then. But what I always say is that when he then sat down and played the songs, there's nothing eccentric about that. Well, except, they were just brilliant. And this is a guy sitting just over there, I've never experienced that before. And I just thought, wow, I always wanted to be a singer-songwriter, but this is something else, he's amazing. So from that day, I sort of wanted to be more involved in what he was doing musically and in the business. So I went from office boy to disc cutter to working in A&R and plugging. But then I started helping run the record company that we formed, DJM, with Steve Brown. And Steve Brown was really Elton John's manager. He was actually his first record producer as well. And so I was his assistant. So I was doing everything on a day-to-day basis to do with Elton. And, we were great buddies and working on his career. And we used to sort of dream about the day, one day he'll be well known, like Cat Stevens and James Taylor and Joni Mitchell. And that's how we saw Elton John as a singer-songwriter, sitting at the piano, playing these songs. Who would have thought that he would then find actually only sitting at the piano not enough, but he wanted to bounce up and down, jump around, go nuts, dress up as Donald Duck or whatever it was, and become like the biggest thing on the planet. We didn't know that. Don't even know if he knew that. That's why he became the biggest, through his performing and through his outrageous behavior, you know. Yeah, of course, he's a genius songwriter and singer-songwriter and pianist. But then so is Joni Mitchell, and in my opinion, so is Jackson Browne, and so is. But what took him into the heights was his outrageous and wanting to be Jerry Lee Lewis and Little Richard and all those people wrapped up in one. What's the other guy? Liberace, I suppose. You know. So he had well, delusions of grandeur, I suppose he would call it, but they weren't delusional, as it turned out.
So cool.
Could have all gone the other way. You know, he could have made a fool of himself, made a twit of himself. But he was never one to, to shrink back from a challenge in any way. He goes full throttle, and that's the other thing I try to I look for in youngsters that I'm working with, this passion and this, over the top, wanting to be something they dream about. You know, they've got a dream of how they see themselves, and it's not enough just to write a song or to play guitar or to play the piano. I say that people should specialize, but I mean, Elton specialized in writing songs and singing and then performing, but he didn't do it all in one go. He did it in stages anyway. Not many people know that Elton didn't even see himself as a singer. He only saw himself as a songwriter. He just wanted to be a great songwriter and pianist. And he used to do sessions as a pianist, not as a singer. You know, he was going around like the same way Jimmy was, and at the same time, actually, when Jimmy Page was doing guitar sessions, Elton was doing piano sessions and keyboard sessions as he started to write more songs, and they weren't really that easy to cover for other people to sing. So it was put to him that maybe he'll have to sing them because no one else is. So he started singing and getting good at it, which is what he's like. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to be great at it, you know. And then it was said, well, you'll have to go out and perform. You know, I don't want to do that. You don't want to do that either. But otherwise, you're not going anywhere. I have to do it. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it full throttle, 100%, give it everything, you know, which he always did, you know, and he always does. He goes out there that's what he did in America, actually. I mean, they before he was famous, they were still sitting there like, well, what's this guy all about? You know, come from England. And maybe they'd heard his album, It's a Little Bit Funny, Your Song, the classical stuff. And, he was determined to show them what he could do. And then, like you're right, sort of aged 18, I went out and was touring with him as a personal assistant. And I was getting into production as well. You know, I produced an album with two girls that Elton played on, Birds of a Feather. And I thought I always wanted to be a producer, really. But it wasn't until Gus Dudgeon built the Mill Studios that then Elton came to do. Actually, it was with Clive Franks, my mate Clive, who was producing this album called A Single Man. And so now I was actually engineering. You know, I engineered Single Man, and then we did Ice on Fire, and then I co-produced a track with Elton when he did the Duets album. I put him together with Chris Rea. They did a duet. I would have loved to have produced an Elton John album, but that never really happened. I only did like a track or two tracks, but I engineered a lot, and I engineered a lot of. I did some live gigs with Elton, doing live sound, because actually live sound is something that I've done quite a lot of. So lots of stuff with Elton to do with that. When I was at Rocket Records, I might as well tell you this. We were offered a band. You know, that we had a tape of this band, 2 tapes, 2 10-inch spools. It was Queen.
Oh, cool.
They were called Queen, and I used to play it. I put it on. I went, blimey, that's great guitar stuff going on there. Never heard all that before. All these guitar harmonies. I thought they were really good. You know, Queen. and I played it to Steve, who was running Rocket Records. But the fact is, they wanted £100,000, and that was in 1972. And they weren't kidding either. You know, they wanted that much money. And we were running the whole company on about 20,000 a year, you know. So it was like completely impossible. And anyway, they weren't that great. You know, when you got the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and the Kinks and the whatever, you know, there were so many great bands around in the 70s. They weren't better than those, you know. They were like good, but they certainly weren't better, and they weren't worth $100,000. And anyway, we didn't go to see them live. You know, I don't think they were playing live. A lot of the bands because I went on to work at Rocket Records, and we were signing new artists, and often it would be that you'd hear the tape, and then they'd say, and that band's playing at the Marquee in London, which was a great club. Yeah. So you go down, and then you'd see Thin Lizzy or whatever it was, you know, and you'd see this great band live with the front guy and all that. Had that have happened with Queen, maybe Elton would have put his hand in his pocket to find $100,000, because then you'd have seen Freddie, you know, as this amazing front guy with this incredible band. So that might have made the difference in signing them. But all we had was a tape. So
when you say they weren't that great, you're referring to the tape. Like the tape wasn't incredible, but once you actually...
Well, it just wasn't, yeah, I mean, you know, it wasn't the greatest singer, they weren't the greatest songs. It didn't sound so original. The main thing I liked was that, well, no one else liked it. I was playing, Elton heard it, Bernie heard it, Steve Brown heard it. They all heard it, and no one signed them. So at that time, I would say it didn't stand out as nowhere near like whatever the Beatles were doing then, the White Album. Well, no, we've gone beyond the White Album. It was just, it wasn't anything. Actually, I've never been a Queen fan anyway. I've never been a big Queen fan.
Interesting.
So I just sort of love that. But you've got to say that live, they were spectacular because of Freddie as a front guy, you know. And they became better anyway. This is the first album. I don't even know what it was called. But so this was only their first album. I think what I was trying to say is, though, that there were so many great bands around, and music was at such a high level at that time. You know, we also when I was at DJM, we had the tapes. No, they weren't tapes. They came in. It was a band called America.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, but they were nowhere near as good as Crosby, Stills and Nash, who we already heard and loved, you know. So we didn't sign them either, which maybe was a mistake. But that Crosby, Stills and Nash were like amazing. Their first album, their second album, you know, totally brilliant, you know. So at that time there was so much great stuff to choose from, and I haven't even got the full list, you know. I mean, bands are a funny dynamic, aren't they? It's a shame that they seem to be on the decline, I would say. And technology's got a lot to do with it.
Oh, 100%. 100%, yeah.
And I think they probably find pretty early on that actually it's not possible to do. So then hopefully sometimes they get in touch with me and say, what's wrong with me? I can't seem to make my track sound like Led Zeppelin or the Beatles. And I've got all this equipment, I've got Pro Tools, I've got everything. And why is it not sounding right? So, you know, we can soon tell them why that is. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how we can get back to that, if ever. It might just be something that's. Well, I'm not complaining too hard, because I like the fact that that the music I worked on is still so highly regarded. You know, so I mean, we thought it was good at the time, but it doesn't seem to have been bettered as you would imagine it should have been. If you imagine the music that went before it, you know. It was such a unique happening, the music of the 60s and the 70s, but it could equally have been bettered so much that you just we don't even bother listening to it anymore, and that's not really the case, you know. I mean, you know, I don't know whether I'm sure you've seen it, but anyway, there's this film with the Beatles out at the moment, Get Back, and it just emphasizes immensely that dynamic between people in a band, you know, musicians in a band getting together. It just emphasizes it in such a great way. Yeah, it shows you some of the disagreements and, you know, what they go through, but it also shows you just how magnificent they were as a band, as four guys sitting around talking. They suddenly pick up instruments and they're playing something, and it's like, it's brilliant because you know it's live and you can see them doing it, and it's no one person can do that.